If you're installing PV or ASHP, you are an early adopter of these technologies, which are still emerging or evolving. And as such, you are at the leading edge, or as it's sometimes called, both humorously and with good reason, the bleeding edge. Now, you might be lucky, but in my experience, you would probably be best to prepare for some problems. Here are my tips for dealing with suppliers. My first piece of advice is to make sure that your installers are MCS certified. Now, you'll need this for your air source heat pump if you want to take advantage of any government grants that may be available. We got a £5,000 grant towards the installation of ours, but it was conditional on having MCS certification. However, you also need it for your solar PV if you want to send any electricity back to the grid. Or more precisely, if you want to send it back to the grid and get paid for it, you will need MCS certification if you want to get registered with a feed-in tariff from your supplier. Now, we didn't know this at the outset, and we are currently chasing our installer for MCS certification for that. So fingers crossed it won't take long for it to come through. Secondly, insist on fully trained installers. When someone arrives to do a job, ask them what they're going to do and why. Now, this might sound painful, but if somebody can't explain what they're going to do, then it's probably best not to let them start. Explaining to you what's going on is part of the job, I would say. What are you going to install? What can I expect from it? How do I monitor it? How do I know it's working? And how do I control it? These are things you have to know. Main contractors may be listed on their website as having been approved by such and such a manufacturer, and that's because they'll have taken some kind of training or got some kind of certification. However, while that's true of the main contractor, it's not necessarily true of the people who actually turn up to do the work. For example, the guy who turned up to install our Zappi car charger. Now, the main contractor was listed as My Energy approved, My Energy being the company who make the Zappi, but the guy who turned up, it turns out, had no training whatsoever. He was able to wire it up to the mains and connect it to the internet, but he left Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock, and although the lights were on, nothing was working, and it took ages for us to get it fixed from that point. In the end, it may not be possible to ensure that all personnel are fully trained and qualified, but it's worth making the point. My third piece of advice is to make sure that your installer has access to the equipment that they're going to install. In other words, that it's in stock. Either they hold it or their distributor definitely does. We had long delays with batteries, and the battery that came through eventually wasn't the one that we were expecting. So if something's in stock, that's fine. But if it's promised, with the issues that everyone has with supply lines, whether that's due to Brexit or hangover from COVID or whatever, then you could have issues. In stock is best. Next, choose a supplier who's a specialist in the equipment that they're going to install for you. There's a bewildering array of companies and equipment out there, and no one installer is going to be an expert in everything. And it's not just that you want the piece of kit installed for you, it's how that piece of kit will then operate with other pieces of kit that are installed. So interoperability is a huge issue, and the more the variables, the greater the potential for errors to creep in. Use installers who are expert in what they install. The best inverter, the best battery, or the best air source heat pump isn't the one that you find rated highest in which magazine or in online reviews somewhere. It's the one that your installer can fit and get working for you properly and come back to service maintain for you. To my next piece of advice, you'll probably say, well, that's obvious, and it's get quotes from different suppliers. Now, it does sound obvious, but we got a quote from one company fairly quickly. We applied for a quote from a second company, and they got back to us and said, thank you for your interest. We will get back to you when we can supply you with a quote, which will be in approximately 2 to 3 months' time. It turned out to be nearer 6 months before they got back to us and said, would you like us to come and quote now? By which time the original quote would have been out of date. So it can be really hard to compare quotes from different installers. So my advice here actually would be find an installer who inspires confidence in you. and don't go with anyone who doesn't, but be patient until you find somebody. Don't worry too much about competitive quotes. Next, have some sympathy, or at least some understanding for your installers. Uh, like you, they're working at the so-called bleeding edge, and it's a tough environment for them to be working in. For example, if a company trains its people up and gets them all nicely qualified, those employees suddenly become very attractive and very rare people who might go off looking for a better paid job with another company, or perhaps just better working conditions. And we experienced our original contractor losing several people that way, which meant there was a lack of continuity, and the contractor was tearing his hair out trying to find people who could do the job that he had agreed to do for us, of course. The shortage of skilled installers is a systemic one. A year ago, the guy who installed our air source heat pump said that there was a government grant of 5,000 available. In fact, the government had made available £150 million for the first year, and he pointed out that this would mean 30,000 installations could be supported. Now, he said at the time, this is ridiculous. There aren't enough qualified ASHP installers in the country to fit that many. And a year later, he was proved right, perhaps, because in the first year, only 14,000 grants were available. That's less than half than could have been budgeted for. Now, you might say it's just that demand wasn't that great, but since everybody around me is saying the problem is qualified and competent installers, and since we've got that data, that does seem to me to be true. And it's broadly true as well. It's not just to do with air source heat pump, it's to do with all the electrical fittings that are involved as well. So, there's a lot of houses being built around the city where I live, and they've all got a gas boiler going in, they've got no PV on the roof. I think that's a scandal. We all need to be moving to green energy, and we need some kind of stimulus put into the economy to encourage people to get trained up in how to fit it. In the meantime, we have got there with it. It's been a bit more painful than I expected, but we have got an air source heat pump, therefore no gas. We have got a PV array, which has significantly reduced our consumption of electricity from the grid. And essentially, we're okay with it now. I just wish I'd known a lot more at the start, and I hope that the videos that I've made now will help you if you're at the beginning of that journey.